Kundalini. There's a few yoga styles connected to this. Spiritualists are very concerned with waking it up, and it's often referred to as a sexual energy. You've probably seen it thrown around a lot amongst New Agers and the Neo-Tantra crowd, but what is this stuff? Today I'm going to tell you about where the word came from, where it went, and how it ended up all over the place. I'll examine some myths and modern misinterpretations to see if we can get closer to the meaning of this mystical concept. It was first mentioned in the Upanishads and made its debut in modern print as a footnote in an 1854 publication of the Dublin University magazine. In the early Tantras, Kundalini was likened to a coiling and uncoiling serpent, but it was also compared to a coil of fire, a bolt of lightning, a flickering flame, a jewel, a seed or sprout, a red flower, and various goddesses. The word Kundali was used as a name for the goddess of war, Durga. And we know that by the 8th century, that word also meant ring, bracelet, or coil of rope. The adjective kundalin means circular or annular. Kundalini finally arrives on the scene in the 12th century when it's mentioned as a noun for snake. It gets adopted as a technical term in Hatha Yoga texts during the 15th century before becoming widely used in the Yoga Upanishads by the 16th century. At a modest 500 years, Kundalini in print is relatively new. So based on the Sanskrit etymology, we get a sense of something that is either in reference to goddesses, inspiration and exhalation, and an energy that is circular or circulating around, in, and out of the body. Modern interpretations situate Kundalini as a mysterious psycho-spiritual force residing in the lowest energy center that must be raised. But in earlier texts, there is an emphasis on Kundalini being located in or above the head and descending. Also, it was not so strongly linked to meditation and yoga. In the Tantra of the goddess Sarasvati, it says, "Transcendental sound enters the body of living organisms in the form of Kundalini and reveals itself there in the form of letters, poetry, and prose." So if you worship Sarasvati, it means that language and speech is the manifest expression of Kundalini in the body. As well as Sarasvati and Durga, Kundalini was also associated with Shiva. Early traditions claim that Kundalini descends from above, from a mark of Shiva, simultaneously bringing forth the universe itself and residing inside of us, providing various capacities and powers, a primordial, all-pervasive consciousness. In Tantric literature, Kundalini is not dormant or sleeping. She is constantly active in the body as the breath. The practices that relate to Kundalini are not concerned with waking up something that is asleep or dormant, because if Kundalini was dormant, you'd be dead. So why and how did the West become obsessed with the idea of Kundalini being asleep, waking it up, and bringing it up the spine to become enlightened? The answer is complicated, crazy, fascinating, and takes us back 140 years. It all started around 1880 with the publications of the Theosophical Society of India. High-ranking members began interpreting and translating the ancient scriptures for Western audiences. Some of these translations have been in continuous print for 100 years and are considered seminal classics. They have become yoga gospel for Westerners. During the mid-1900s, Western authors started using these texts to devise their own spiritual systems and books. And in turn, their books were copied and innovated upon and changed. And their books were copied and innovated upon and changed. And so on and so on. This culminated in the late 70s with an explosion of American publications using appropriated, stylized versions of Indian spiritual philosophy. It was a wholesale importation, a flood of Indian spirituality that looked genuine, but was actually based on work that had been done by Western authors only 40 years prior. The status quo of post-baby boom America was being challenged by the revolutionary countercultures of flower power, free love, and anti-war. The idea that Westerners were corrupt capitalist colonizers, devoid of spirituality and requiring expansions of consciousness, but Hindus by contrast were more spiritually and therefore socially evolved, quickly took hold. This fundamental misconception established itself within New Age culture and doggedly persists to this day. How? Well, in a word, books. One of the most popular books on Kundalini during the pop culture revolutions of the 60s and 70s was Gopi Krishna's Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man. It's a yogic fear and loathing, but set in Lahore instead of Vegas. And this biography focuses on a most staggering event, the deeply harrowing and torturous result of Krishna's spontaneous Kundalini activation. With no formal training in any style of yoga, aside from a daily meditation regimen, Krishna had somehow achieved the near impossible. The ancient scriptures are full of dense, jumbled and complex instructions and commentary on how to activate Kundalini, but no one in the modern eye had actually done it. Krishna must have performed it incorrectly, as the results were nothing short of a freakish horror show that lasted over a decade. It took 12 years to process and recover from, and at times sent him into howling despair, where he felt close to insanity and even death. Krishna believes that unlocking Kundalini properly will allow us to transcend the brutality of our society and evolve to create a more humane and civilized world. The idea of spiritual warriors gaining liberation through intense alterations of perception in order to bring about the spiritual awakening of humanity was eagerly appropriated by the countercultures of the hippies, beatniks, and psychedelic academics. This also became a central tenement of New Age culture. This idea that we all have to wake up, and that by working on yourself spiritually, you can wake up less spiritually evolved people than yourself. The much touted New Age concept of the Kundalini Awakening, now seen by many as some kind of hippie holy grail, undoubtedly comes from this book. Unfortunately, to look at things this way displays a blundering misread of his material. His awakening refers to an evolutionary process that will advance humanity at large to highly refined modes of being, an evolutionary human birthright of superconsciousness. Despite Krishna's utterly masterful and seminal description of Kundalini as an evolutionary, primordial, all-pervasive, universal consciousness engine, Westerners simplified this into a McDonald's menu. Perhaps because Krishna used the term awakening a lot in the book and frames Kundalini as the reservoir to be raised, that the less complex-minded created this aphoristic rhetoric of having a sacred awakening. This rhetoric is now trotted out by modern cult leaders and yoga teachers because it's easy to keep parroting around what was squawked to them so many times before. What should have been a dire and serious warning about the dangers of exploring this art, in fact became a romanticized goal to aspire to. I guess no one could have anticipated how popular the Kundalini concept was to become, nor how perfectly Krishna's book dovetailed into the acid wave zeitgeist that was sweeping America at the time, replete with psychedelic spirituality and beatnik academics profusely publishing their musings on their adventures into drug-assisted derangement. Amongst the deluge of publications concerning Indology around that time, only a few are as foundational as Krishna's and John Woodruff's The Serpent Power. This book contains a translation of a 1577 Bengali text indicating Kundalini as a goddess that awakes, rises, and pierces the chakras like balloons popping on her way up. Interestingly enough, When Krishna was in dark despair and looking for advice from authorities on Kundalini, he could find no one to help him. And only titles that were English translations, in India of all places. Although he doesn't mention any titles in his book, I would put good money on the Serpent Power being one of the titles that he may have perused. It and a mere handful of other works are the basis for all further Western publications on raising this serpent. But I wish Western authors had paid more attention to gopis. As Mr. Krishna can attest, Kundalini is rather dangerous, and waking up that energetic snake can lead to damaging and horrific anguish. He states that our mental institutions are full of people who have either prematurely active or morbidly functioning Kundalini. It should not be meddled with without proper instruction from a true master of the art. They are very hard to find and wouldn't dream of teaching a novice without many years of preparatory training. That is why modern Kundalini systems are very dumbed down and simplified, easy for busy rat racers to follow. Yogi Bhajan created a wonderful modern version that is safe, fun, and easy to practice. He mixed Bhakti, Shakti, Mantric, Hatha, and Sikh traditions into one format, and he called this new system Kundalini Yoga. A little bit misleading if you ask me, but here we are. So it's not only Westerners persisting with the idea of awakening the serpent, because Yogi Bhajan brought his style to a global audience. Busy modern Indian people felt that they had rediscovered their heritage through the revival of an ancient and forgotten form of yoga. Once Bhajan's and other versions became popular in the West, the neo-spiritualists peddling sacred sex and yoga teachers jumped right on it, without realizing that they were practicing a rather modern innovation. But perhaps these are all good things, as the original teachings are very complex and potentially dangerous. So it's best that their true understanding has been obscured. Authorities on this subject insist that the teachings are intentionally distorted, jumbled, and hidden to hide the true methods of manipulating energy from the uninitiated novice. It is said that someone who has mastered the arts of energy manipulation can psychically control and manipulate others' minds, bodies, and even physical matter itself. But as we've seen, you're more likely to send yourself nuts trying. Personally, I like the idea that Kundalini is a primordial evolutionary energy that resides within and all around us, bestowing the life force and powering language, so that I can use it to actuate my spiritual potential, or say, create a YouTube lecture. And so, I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed my Kundalini here today. If you like this video, please share it. And if you didn't, well, keep your Kundalini to yourself.